we're going to get started. There you are. Hi. Thank you for joining us again. We do have a couple of schools right now, I believe, on the stream, and we may have a couple more joining us. And I don't know whether we'll have live students in our room, and I don't know if you will in Bozeman, but we will go ahead and get started. And here comes Erin. Awesome. All righty. Go ahead, Lori, and introduce.
Great. Well, thank you, students, for joining us today. And I want to send a big thanks to the panel members who also took time out of their busy schedules to come here today. And I also want to thank some donors who were very generous in their funding to make these programs happen. We're doing this Grizzly Bear Distance Learning Program as well as a Sage Grouse program in the next couple weeks. So before I get started, I want to thank those donors, and that would be the Montana Outdoor Legacy Foundation, the Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundation, Weyerhaeuser Foundation, and then the Claiborne and Ortenberg Foundation and Cabela's. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the panel members, and they are going to spend like a minute or so introducing themselves and what their role is in either grizzly bear conservation or management or why they are here today. Thank you. And why don't we start with you, Trina?
Oh boy. My name is Trina Bradley. I am the Vice President of Morass River Livestock Association, which serves a 4-county area in north central Montana. I also have a ranch with my husband and my daughter about 30 miles south of Browning, where we raise cows. And so I am here as a landowner representative and a livestock owner representative so that everyone can see our side of the story.
Hi, my name is Mark Lambrecht. I'm the Director of Government Affairs for the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. We're a national hunting-based nonprofit organization with our headquarters in Missoula. We have over 234,000 members nationwide, a network of 12,000 volunteers, and almost 14,000 members in the state of Montana. Our mission is to ensure the future of elk, other wildlife, their habitat, and our hunting heritage. The other wildlife part also includes grizzly bears and other predators. Since 1984, when we were founded, we have protected or enhanced almost 7.5 million acres of habitat nationwide and secured public recreational access to over 1.2 million acres in the country. We strongly believe in the North American model of wildlife conservation, which is that state wildlife management state wildlife agencies should manage both predator and prey species, and that predators such as grizzly bears ought to be regulated by Montana Department of Fish, Wildlife, Parks, and that management should include regulated hunting.
Yeah, I'm Gary Bertolotti with Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, Regional Supervisor out of Great Falls. Fish, Wildlife, and Parks is responsible for managing, protecting, and preserving all fish, wildlife species across the landscape in Montana, as well as their habitats, and provide recreational opportunities to those. My role related to grizzly bears is the Northern Continental Divide ecosystem and the Rocky Mountain front eastern side of the Northern Continental Divide ecosystem, and managing all aspects of grizzly bears with our partners, federal partners, state partners, and landowner partners across that eastern edge of the Rocky Mountain front and onto the prairies.
Hi, I'm Nick Givok. I'm the Conservation Director for the Montana Wildlife Federation. We're Montana's oldest wildlife conservation organization, founded in 1936. We're a general wildlife organization for all native species. And, you know, we've done a really good job in our state of recovering ungulates, big game animals, deer, elk, antelope, and we've also done a good job with grizzly bears. And so our role is coming in and helping provide through funding with the National Wildlife Federation, provide funding for some of these efforts to prevent conflicts in the first place with grizzly bears as we learn to live with them in new habitats. And we're going to talk about that today. Thanks.
Okay, great. Let's go to Mitch.
Hi there, I'm Mitch Daugherty. I'm the Conservation Manager with the Vital Ground Foundation. We're a land trust based out of Missoula, Montana. Our mission is to protect and restore grizzly bear habitat throughout North America and also help to prevent conflicts between bears and humans. A lot of the work we do is on the habitat side of things. We work on conservation easements with private landowners to protect habitat, and we also purchase land to protect habitat for wildlife. On the conflict end of things, we support folks working on the ground and programs to remove carcasses, electric fences, and things like that. So thanks for having me.
Thanks, Mitch. And Erin?
Yeah, my name is Erin Edge. I work with Defenders of Wildlife. Defenders is a national nonprofit organization started in 1947, works to restore imperiled species in their habitat. I work on grizzly bear conservation issues. Defenders started about 1990s. We started the grizzly bear compensation program in Montana, so compensating folks for livestock lost to grizzly bears. And then we also started our grizzly bear conflict mitigation program, which works on things like electric fencing and range riders, assisting with funding and working with communities to prevent conflicts between bears and people. I work on that as well as addressing policy changes. So I spend a lot of time behind a computer, not out in the field as much anymore, working to look at whether Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks has a new policy on grizzly bears, or the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, or the Forest Service. So kind of runs the gamut.
Thanks, Erin. And we'll go to Bozeman. Let's go to you, Kim Johnston.
Who did she say?
Kim? Kim, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
So I'm Kim Johnston. I am the Field Project Manager for People and Carnivores, and I work on large carnivore prevention in southwest Montana. People and Carnivores is a nonprofit organization that works to reconnect and restore large carnivore populations while working with the region's people to reduce human-carnivore conflict. And our goal is to keep people and their property safe and keeping large carnivores such as grizzly bears, wolves, and mountain lions wild. And so we work with local communities, landowners, ranchers, hikers, sportsmen's groups, as well as agencies and tribal members to find ways to reduce conflicts with carnivores. And we use a variety of prevention tools for reducing those conflicts, things like electric fencing, bear-resistant garbage cans, backcountry food poles to keep bears from accessing food and attractants. We emphasize using temporary deterrents such as scare devices that can take advantage of a carnivore's natural weariness to human activity. Helping ranchers incorporate things like livestock guard dogs, as well as range riders or herders in their livestock practices, as well as carcass management programs. We also emphasize the importance of bear safety training, as well as the use of bear spray. And so by using these tools and helping people and landowners, ranchers understand these tools and how to use them, we hope to keep bears and other wildlife wild while keeping people and their property safe.
Thanks, Kim. Julie?
Hi, I'm Julie York. I'm a wildlife biologist with the U.S. Forest Service. I'm on the Custer-Gallatin National Forest, which is a forest that's adjacent to Yellowstone National Park, just to the north, based out of Gardner, adjacent to the park. And work with grizzly bears in education with the general public. So we do bear aware safety programs. We have several technicians who work during the summer. We work as a partner with the Montana Bear Education Working Group with Danielle, to my right, who will be talking in a minute. So we go to campgrounds, we go to trails, we work in communities and area events across a pretty large area, educating the public on bear aware and to reduce that bear-human conflict. And then I also work on trying to look at ways to reduce impacts to bears and to bear habitat by the Forest Service projects that we implement on the forest. Just a second. So we implement a variety of activities across the forest year-round, and a lot of these are timber management, timber removal, road building, trail building. So I work with our other people on our forest and with the Fish and Wildlife Service to reduce impacts to grizzly bears.
Hi everyone, I'm Danielle Euler. I'm the Education Coordinator for the Montana Bear Education Working Group. Our group is a unique collaborative of state, federal, and non-governmental organizations. It includes the U.S. Forest Service, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, People and Carnivores, Wildlife Management Institute, and Wildlife Conservation Society. So Julie and Kim are colleagues of mine, and our group's goal is to reduce human-bear conflict, to increase people's understanding and awareness of where bears might be and how to respond to them, how to prevent conflicts in their activities, and also to create a consistent message across our region so that everybody from the various organizations and agencies I work with is all saying the same thing about what to do in bear country and how to stay safe. So those are our basic goals. We accomplish those goals in a number of ways. We most often do public outreach through our bear technicians with the Forest Service and a couple of other colleagues that we go to events, we speak with school groups, we talk to agencies and train people on the use of bear spray and other bear safety techniques. So that's our biggest outreach effort, and we spoke to about 23,000 people in Montana last year and trained about 9,000 people on the use of bear spray. So bear safety is of our utmost concern.
Great, thanks, Dan. And this is the big one. So I'm going to start it off with you, Trina. And the question that I got was, do you agree with the thought that grizzly bears should continue to be on the endangered species list? How does it affect you if they stay on or come off?
Okay. I absolutely think they are ready to come off the endangered species list because they are very well recovered, and there is no way, unless there's an apocalypse, that the bears are going to ever need to go back on that list. How does it affect me? As a livestock producer, if the bears were taken off the list and handed over to state management, then the management practices could be a lot stricter, and that means a first strike could mean you're done, no matter if it's a male or a female. I mean, if a sow and her cubs come into my calving lot and kill 5 calves, they're done. And that sounds harsh, but if those problem bears are managed, then we won't have as many problems, and the social acceptance of these bears will go up significantly, and then they'll be more accepted on ranches, and they'll have more of an opportunity to survive and thrive.
Thank you. And then Aaron, did you want to respond to that question at all?
Sure. I think one thing that's important to note as far as like our conflict prevention program is regardless if grizzly bears are listed or delisted, we're still going to have to work together to try and mitigate conflicts. And so that means well into the future, regardless of what listed status they have and what population, our work continues and even is more extensive as grizzly bears move out of these populations and expand.
Great, thank you. And so I have another question that came in from Colstrip High School. I'm going to address you, Gary, with this question. Where do you think bears get into the most trouble?
Good question, and a diverse answer. It depends on where in the ecosystem we're talking. If it's on the west side, which is Kalispell, Columbia Falls, it's in those areas where bears come into communities or into areas where landowners have attractants and conflict begins. On the west side, you've got a different type environment, a forested environment. Bears are not that visible. When they are and they're in conflict, we tend to address that. On the east side, we don't have that forested area once they get out off the Rocky Mountain front. It's open grain fields, it's river bottoms, and so bears are very visible. And even though there may be less bears present in that habitat type, they are visible. People notice them. When they notice them, people tend to think conflict is going to happen. That's not always the case, but when it does happen, livestock is involved, property is involved, small communities scattered across the landscape there are tending to be near these tributaries come off the Rocky Mountain front, and that's where the bears are traveling to begin with, and then they leave those areas at night or in the evenings to feed up on these benches where people tend to have homes and livestock and grain.
Can I add something real quick? I just want to say, as much as it hurts me to say this, it's not always the bear's fault. And by that, I mean, as these bears are expanding into new areas, it's exciting for people to see them. And so one person will say, oh my gosh, there was a bear in my yard last night, I can't believe it. And their neighbor will say, oh, well, I want to see it, so I'm going to leave a pan of bacon grease out in my yard so that the bear will come to my house so I can take a picture of it and put it on Facebook. So that ruined that bear. More than likely, that bear is going to be removed from the population, and it was no fault of his own. It's just because some people are stupid.
Thank you, Trina. And that's actually a really good segue into the next question that I have from Corvallis High School. And I think there'll be a couple panel members that will go in and speak to this. But I think I'm going to start off with Danielle Euler, because I know you deal a lot with educating public on bear and human safety. What preferred methods, Danielle, would you like the community to do to help mitigate the actions you must take to prevent bad interactions with bears? Let's rephrase it. What actions?
Okay, so there are a few different realms in which people can make a difference in their immediate sphere. So if we were to take one example, which would be, let's say, a residential community. So at home, you can assess your surroundings and see what's in your yard or in your shed or nearby your home that might bring a bear someplace that it doesn't belong and that it might learn bad habits. And being high schoolers, you have some influence on what might go on around your house, and you might have a say in how those attractants are managed. So that's the first step. A big one would be bird feeders and your garbage. Those are probably the two biggest. Pet food, so dog bowls full of dog food outside. Essentially, as long as you can secure those in places bears can't get them, and especially with garbage, keeping it in your home or in a shed or a garage at night or in a bear-resistant container. Those are good places to start. I could go on for a long time about this, but those are just some initial thoughts about that.
Okay, and does anybody else on the panel want to comment on that?
Raise your hand.
Raise your hand.
Anyone else?
I'll just add on to that. So yeah, just the importance of securing attractants, whether it's removing them or if that's not always the case where you can't remove them, locking them up in a shed or a hard-sided building or even putting out an electric fence. Removing those attractants is a huge first step at reducing conflicts. And then also just working together is very important. You can be doing all the right things at your own property, but if your neighbor is feeding bears or leaving garbage out or the rest of the community is, you might still see those conflicts with bears. So it's important that we also work together on these issues so that we can prevent conflicts across the landscape together. And also just take advantage of resources. There's a lot of resources out there. A lot of groups are doing work on these issues. So it's important for communities to be able to understand those resources are out there and available and take advantage of them and just work together because there is solutions to these issues, especially when we can come together and work together on them.
Thank you. All right, so I have another question that came in from Colstrip. And actually there's two questions, but I'm going to start off with the first one is, probably address this to Gary. How would grizzly bear hunting be managed if implemented? And then the second question that was asked is, how does black bear hunting affect grizzly bears? And I might pose that one to you, Mark. I'll restate it.
Okay, how would we as an agency manage hunting for grizzly bears? That's a good question. And I don't have a clear answer yet. Because as we move forward, hunting will be an issue that will be somewhat divisive depending on what philosophy you have related to grizzly bears. The commission, our director, and there may even be political people weighing in on how we do those things. To begin with, it will be very selective, very minimal, and we will probably focus in on those areas that we see a higher level of conflict and that we believe will provide some management tool to eliminate or reduce those conflict in those areas, whether it be in the Yellowstone ecosystem or in an NCDE or in the future in the Yak or Bitterroot.
Thank you, Gary. And Mark, I'm going to have you add on to that.
Sorry.
And that question was same thing from Colstrip. How would you think that black bear hunting affects grizzly bears?
Well, I think certainly the biggest impact would be a mistaken identity issue. You know, if you have a black bear hunter that hasn't gone through all of the necessary steps that Fish and Wildlife Parks provides to be able to tell the difference between a black bear and a grizzly bear, and there are unfortunate cases where a grizzly bear gets killed. That impacts the grizzly population. It certainly impacts the reputation of lawful regulated hunting. So I would encourage anybody who is a black bear hunter to make sure you know the difference between a black bear and a grizzly bear. But it is important to hunt black bears. It helps control that predator population, and it would be important to hunt grizzly bears as well for the same reason.
Great, thank you. And then the other question, I think I might open this up. Well, no, I think I'll come back to that question. I think I'm going to ask the question to Mitch, if you're ready. Hold on, let me see here. Just had it. What is your organization's biggest challenge or concern when it comes to grizzly bear management? And that comes from Corvallis.
Sure. Thanks for the question. One of our biggest challenges has been finding funding for, habitat protection work we do. And that's always the crux of the issue for us. I think, recently we completed an inventory and prioritization of habitat needs and conflict needs across Washington, Idaho, and Montana. So we have a really good idea of where we should be making conservation investments on the ground. Priority areas that, folks, ranchers, communities need assistance with, purchasing garbage cans or securing a sanitation facility, or a specific linkage area that, needs some habitat security to get animals from one side to the other. And so, again, the hardest part for us is always finding funding for these projects, but we're pretty excited to have the information we need to make the investments in the right areas now.
Thanks, Mitch. And then the next question that I have, and I'm going to post this one, I'm going to have you start off with it, Nick. If any of the other panel members want to chime in, just put your thumbs up. So the question I have here is, they were wondering how much collaboration goes on with your organization and other organizations across the state, or countries for that matter, with your proximity to Canada, on working on these management strategies or grizzly bear conservation.
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a lot of collaboration, and so we came in a couple years ago. For example, you've heard about carcass pickup in the Blackfoot Valley, where they've had a tremendously successful program of getting dead livestock. Ranchers always have a certain amount of loss. To get that off the landscape quickly so that it doesn't attract bears down toward ranches. We got started 2 years ago, a similar program in the Centennial Valley, and if anybody's familiar with the Yellowstone ecosystem west of there are a lot of grizzly bears moving through the Centennial Valley. Now, as wildlife conservationists, we like that because that's bears recolonizing historic habitat. But anyway, we got other NGOs to get involved in that. The State Livestock Loss Program put up a prevention grant for that. The local Centennial Valley Association came in, and it's just been a big partnership. The same thing is happening up on the Rocky Mountain front. And in fact, a rancher who spent his whole life up there, Gene Curry, used to be president of the Montana Stock Growers. He supported the program so strongly. He not only supported it, he actually drove the truck the first year because they couldn't find someone to do that. So the only way this will work is with this broad collaboration of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, local ag groups, and nonprofit groups, all pitching in funding and resources to make these programs work.
Lori, can I go back to the previous question just for a second?
Sure.
About the greatest challenge? So I wanted to follow up on that. The Elk Foundation does a significant amount of work with the Forest Service and the BLM, and also state land management agencies on habitat enhancement, and that includes some logging and grazing, prescribed burning, all trying to create that early successional forest habitat that benefits elk and other wildlife, including grizzly bears. But on many of our projects, they get stopped in court, and there will be organizations out there that serially make challenges under the Endangered Species Act that active forest management like that would have an undue impact on grizzly bears. And so those projects end up being delayed year after year after year, and eventually the habitat degrades.
Great, thank you. Did any of the other panel members want to weigh in on that last question?
I'll weigh in on the collaborative question. Yeah, I'll just say I think that, our most successful projects that we've been a part of have been landowner-led or led by local folks who identify issues in their own communities and then are looking for support. And so most of our projects are collaborative, and I think the best projects that we have are collaborative, and that comes with working with conservation groups and state, federal, tribal agencies, just a whole suite of entities. And I think when you can bring all of those folks together is when you get longer term programs that last. And then the one thing is that I think funding is always a challenge, and I think that's a challenge going into the future, is that these collaboratives are continuously coming up with projects, but just the funding isn't there.
Great, thank you, Erin. Anyone else? Okay. So I'm going to pose this question. I think I'm going to pose it to Kim Johnston. What exactly do range riders do? And maybe Nick, you can chime in on this too. And how widespread is that program?
Yeah, so range riders help to manage the herd health and herd distribution. And there's a variety of different range rider programs out there. Some are just range riders that the ranchers hire themselves. And so those herders might be out there, again, just managing for herd health. They are able to manage the herd distribution, able to doctor sick or injured vulnerable animals out in the landscape. There's also different range rider programs that are going through non-for-profit organizations or watershed groups that also might be trying to incorporate wildlife monitoring into not just monitoring the herd health, but again, monitoring for carnivores around the area and being able to make adjustments with their livestock practices. And so it just depends on, there's not a ton of range rider programs out there, but I know a lot of ranchers are using riders in some capacity or herders, and there's more and more groups looking into these programs for solutions.
Great, thank you. Nick, did you want to comment on that?
Well, I read the Range Rider report from the Centennial Valley. It puts out a monthly report, and they're just aware, frankly, sometimes they know of a grizzly bear hanging in an area. Maybe they'll move some cattle away from there, or we talk about livestock carcass pickup, but sometimes you lose a cow that is so far back you can't remove it. That's a real attractant for both these predator species. So they really just keep an eye on the cattle, and it does affect herd management at times, but they can be very effective programs.
Great, thank you. All right, I have another question from Corvallis High School. I'm going to pose this to you, Trina. How do you rate this problem? And I think they're referencing grizzly bears. How do you think this problem with grizzly bears is important and relevant to your livelihood? It's just, how do you rate this problem in importance and relevance with your livelihood?
Okay. Bears rate right up there at the top for a number of reasons. The number one reason being human safety. I mean, I have an 11-year-old daughter that can't go outside unsupervised because we have so many bears. When we're fencing, there's almost always two of us. One of us is holding the gun and the other one is fencing. If my daughter wants to even go over to the corral to see her horse, she has to be supervised because we just have so many bears. And I don't want that to sound like we're just living in fear, because we're not, but we're not stupid either. And you can't just wander around our ranch like my husband used to do when he was a little kid, because it's just not safe. The other issue, of course, is livestock conflicts. So we have to always keep in mind when we're putting cows out to make sure that they're safe, or even when we're checking cows at night, we have to make sure that there aren't bears in the corral or bears near the corral or whatever. And so we have to adjust how we turn cows out as well, so that there's a big enough group of cows with their baby calves that the cows can protect that group of baby calves from anything that comes in. So yeah, bears are part of our everyday lives on the ranch, and that's true for every rancher on the Rocky Mountain front.
Thanks, Trina. So I think I have one question, and this is going to go to the panel, almost all the panel members, if you have this opportunity. So some students are wondering if there are any opportunities for summer internships, volunteering, to learn more about this challenge. For the kids that are participating in the challenge, they want to know if there are any internship opportunities or volunteer opportunities for them to work with any of your organizations.
Who do you want to start?
Why don't we start with, I can speak to that. This is Lori. I know that Fish, Wildlife, and Parks does offer several different internships to college students, and that could be from going out and working with a bear biologist to working at our education center, Montana Wild. For high school students, what I would encourage all high school students to do is to get in close contact with their regional office nearest them and ask them if there are volunteer opportunities. I know just at our organization in Montana Wild, we take on a lot of youth volunteers as well as next door at the Rehabilitation Center. But I'll open it up to other panel members if you know of any of those opportunities.
Let's go with Mitch maybe first, and then Aaron, and then we'll
Sure.
go to both.
Yeah, so at Vital Ground, we have had internships in the past, primarily for college-age students. In fact, we have one advertised right now for a conservation writer. We're looking to do some stories on both grizzly bears and then a lot of T&E species throughout the Pacific Northwest in partnership with the Forest Service. So that's one opportunity. We have open to college students at the moment. In the past, we've also hired folks to do some GIS or some mapping work for us. And then just some general office activities. We get really busy around the holidays with appeals and things like that, and so we have oftentimes students helping out with addressing envelopes, stuffing envelopes, and things like that. So, and then occasionally we may have an opportunity in the field. We do have some restoration projects going on in the near future here up in the Troy-Libby community, and then we also have a community forest project up in Troy where we have a stakeholders group, and there may be opportunities there in the future to get out on the ground and help restore some habitat in a community forest up there.
Thanks, Mitch.
Aaron?
Yeah, so we occasionally do have internship opportunities, and then we also have worked independently with different schools. So that could be on a project where the school wants to set up some wildlife cameras and monitor and determine kind of what they're seeing in their area. We've worked with the school to set up a wildlife camera on a chicken coop, and then they helped design the electric fence around it, and then they monitored that. So if the school itself is interested in a project, I would ask them to just feel free to contact me, and sometimes we can tailor an actual project around stuff that we do. We also work on other species besides grizzly bears, black-footed ferrets, bison, wolves, other things, wolverine. And so we also have a winter monitoring program for wolverine. So yeah, if folks are interested in doing something, feel free to send us your contact information. And then if we have a project come available, if we can create a project, we'd be happy to.
Great. Let's go to Bozeman. Whoever wants to take it first. Anyone?
Hi, this is Julie with the Forest Service. We don't currently have an internship program on the Custer Gallatin, but I would just say that you can check with your local Forest Service office if there's one in your town and find out if they have one. Because I don't know what other forests have, and there could be a local biologist who does have a program. If you're interested, I'll be glad to help further that. If you you can contact me and I can pass that information along and see. As far as volunteers, it really it's more if you're probably more local, so it really depends on, again, where you're living and if there's something going on.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I would say that we don't have a formalized way to volunteer with the working group that I work for, but I would direct students to both Fish, Wildlife, and Parks and the Forest Service. And I would also be open to, if any students ever saw me or my coworkers out with our bear trailer doing an event, you could always come talk with us in shadow, and we could give you information on how to get involved and give you a little informal look into what we do.
Okay. Let's go to Helena then.
Okay. The Elk Foundation, we do have internship opportunities for certain college-age students, but we also have chapters in just about every community in the state of Montana, and we have volunteers at each of those chapters that help out with our banquets, but more importantly during the summer months on our habitat projects. So you could find yourself out there either fencing or pulling fence or pulling weeds or spraying weeds, all to benefit elk habitat, and have a lot of families that take those projects on as well.
Anyone else?
Yes, I think from Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, Lori mentioned it, we do have some intern programs, mostly for college students, but we're always looking for volunteers to assist on our wildlife management areas, which include those on the Rocky Mountain front. If there is an opportunity to learn about grizzly bears and there's a teacher or a classroom that really wants to get involved and do some hands-on stuff, feel free to contact our regional office in Great Falls or any of our regional offices and see what we can set up.
Great. Shall we do the lightning round?
Yep.
Oh, sorry, Nick. Sorry.
Yeah, at the Montana Wildlife Federation, certainly high school age kids can volunteer in Helena here, and it's pretty, it is basic volunteer work, stuffing envelopes and stuff like that. We also have our more than 15 affiliate clubs around the state, and they do projects on, again, wildlife management areas, and so, you can see those projects on our Facebook page as well as the page of our affiliate clubs. And then once you get to college age, we do have summer-long internships as well. So.
Great. All right, so I think we're going to go ahead and start closing, and what we're going to ask is that the panel members, in one sentence, or maybe a couple of sentences, just say what they hope the students go away with today more than anything else.
Where do you want to start?
Let's start with Erin.
Always. Yeah, I think, a good takeaway from today would be that this grizzly bear issue and other wildlife issues are complex, and that everybody on the panel today has varying viewpoints, but that everybody's viewpoints are valuable, and that looking at things from a different perspective can be really helpful when you're trying to find solutions.
Thanks, Erin. Why don't we go to you, Trina?
I wrote a speech for this one. I didn't count the sentences, so sorry. I just wanted to point out that ranchers on the front and anywhere are very underappreciated when it comes to the habitat and conservation discussion. We provide thousands of acres of habitat for many species of wildlife with no incentives from NGOs, and we have for hundreds of years. We often get a bad rap for wanting stricter management for bears and more lethal removal of problem bears, but the grizzlies also wouldn't have had such a successful recovery if it hadn't been for private landowners.
It's true. Just wanted to make sure everybody understood, it's all about the habitat. Because of our prolonged history of fire suppression on public lands and fractured land ownership patterns and a lack of forest management, where we no longer seem to be able to do any work on our forests, bears are starting to look elsewhere for their habitat needs. This is a great source of conflict between the bears and humans, and I just wanted to remind everybody too that it is hunters, through purchasing hunting licenses and through an excise tax on hunting and recreational shooting equipment, and ammunition that pays for grizzly bear management.
Yeah, and from Fish, Wildlife, and Parks perspective, Trina, you said it right. Landowners, ranchers, farmers out there are an important piece of the wildlife puzzle. Without the private landowners, our partners in the federal system that have habitat out there and manage those habitats, this success story wouldn't have been possible. So it is about partnership, it is about respecting everybody's view on things and moving forward with those partners to address all of the things that come with a large carnivore on the landscape.
So I never thought I'd agree with Trina Bradley on so much, but I think that does illustrate the need for that everybody has to be engaged in the future of grizzly conservation. And I've always said it's not just farmers and ranchers, but I think we can all recognize that pulling the dog food bowl off the back porch is a lot different than protecting cattle that are 4 miles from your house or on thousands of acres. What we can do as the public with this public wildlife resource is provide the funding for these programs to work and recognize that we value this valued native wildlife species, our state animal, the logo of our Fish and Wildlife Agency, and the mascot of one of our public universities. So we all have to be in it together. And yes, I do think the public should put forward those dollars, and we do. But we will be successful with grizzly bears if everybody works together, and we're doing that, and we're going to continue that.
Thanks, Mitch. And Mitch?
Sure, thanks. These are some really great answers coming from the panel here, and I have to agree with everything that everyone has said. And, you know, from Vital Ground's perspective, it is about the habitat, both on private land and public land. And, again, conflict prevention is key to sustainability and recovery of grizzly bears.
Danielle Bozeman, can you hear us?
Yeah, we can hear you. So I just want to impress upon the students that they're living in a pretty important time for wildlife conservation, and this is a really interesting issue, and I'm really thankful that they're a part of it here today. I want to reiterate what everyone else has said, that it's very complicated, and it's only going to happen if we work together, and the burden and the responsibility shouldn't just be on one group. So that's how we're going to move forward.
Danielle. Julie?
This is Julie. I would just, definitely everything that everyone else has said, but just make sure you educate yourselves and your family and friends on what you need to do when you're living and working and playing in bear country to reduce those potential conflicts and keep bears and humans safer.
Great, thank you. And Kim, you can wrap it up.
Yeah, and so for the students that are kind of thinking about all these issues we've been talking about and trying to think of ideas to develop conflict prevention programs, I think, we've all kind of said it, it's important to involve all the stakeholders and just working together to develop solutions to reduce these conflicts across the landscape. We might all have varying different views and perspectives, but a lot of us do have things in common. I think we all can agree we want to see wild animals stay wild, we want to see people and their property safe, and we want to reduce conflicts. So even though we do have a lot of differences between these stakeholders, we do have a lot of common things. So it's important to find commonality when we bring these stakeholders together, and again, just working together to come up with solutions.
Thanks, Kim.
Great, and thank you panelists so much. Thank you schools who have been in on the live stream. This has been an amazing conversation so far, and we have one more session at 1:30. So panelists, you have earned lunch. So go ahead and go to lunch and be back about 1:15.
Is it 1:30 or 1:20?
It's 1:30. Okay, the session's at 1:30, so if you guys would be back by no later than 1:15, that'd be great.
Thank you very much.
You bet. Thank you, everybody.